I had such a good time reading the first part of Purple Jesus that I thought I'd read a little more Purple Jesus today. If you'll remember, I left my character at 11 years old, running down the train tracks after having had his first drinks of alcohol. We rejoin him in the next paragraph about 24 years later. 24 years later, in the J.R. Lassman Middle School parking lot, that freedom was long gone. My 11-year-old daughter Jenny was inside with her mother, my ex-wife Marilyn. They wouldn't have expected nor wanted my attendance at the 6th grade orientation. Nothing stopped me from attending. No restraining orders or injunctions had been issued. I'd driven back and forth in front of the school as the rest of the parents streamed inside with their kids. My hands were cramped from gripping the steering wheel. When the crowds had mostly subsided and the only parents left scurrying for the front doors were the ones still in work clothes, ties loosened around their necks, legs still encased in hosiery. I found a spot at the far edge of the lot, tucked between two recycling dumpsters, and I watched the stragglers until the parking lot was free and clear, and then I walked around the back. I kept my hands in my pockets because of the shaking. As a student in this school, I'd always loved the loading dock and the rubber bumpers along its front. I volunteered to wheel the trash barrels through the halls for the janitors, just so I could enjoy its arid and lonesome plain of concrete. It was always cool under the overhang, and the rest of the school seemed miles away. I stepped onto the dock and knelt down and pressed my palms against the cement. A janitor came outside and walked to the edge. He was young, 20 or so, with homemade tattoos running up both forearms, words that I couldn't read and that blurred into blotches. "Hey," I said. He nodded. "My kid's inside with her mother," I said. "I was just checking out the old stomping grounds." "Sure," he said. "You work here long?" "First week." He put his hands in his pockets and stared out beyond the school fence like he had friends waiting for him in the ragweed and the trash trees. "Good job?" I said. "A job," he said. "They say it'll be busy as a motherfucker in a few weeks." I wasn't sure how to respond. The loading dock smelled of produce and cleaning supplies. Mop buckets lined the back wall. 2 posted signs warned workers to keep clear of incoming trucks and not to smoke. Only later did I realize that the janitor had come out to sneak a cigarette, but I spoiled the opportunity. "Do you mind if I go through this door instead of walking all the way back around the front?" The janitor shrugged, hands still in his pockets. I went through the door and down the long service corridor toward the auditorium where several hundred parents and children and administrators and teachers had gathered. Just beyond the double doors, dozens of greeters stood ready to welcome me to the J.R. Lassman Middle School family, but I was shaking too badly to greet anyone. I'd sweat through my shirt. I was grateful for the solitude of the service corridor. The exit signs cast their blush over the door jambs. I pressed my body against the steel doors and put my eye up to the gap between them. Inside, rows and rows of chairs filled with bright, attentive parents and children. The backboards and hoops were raised to the rafters, haloed by fluorescent light. The principal stood at the podium just as he had when I was in the audience with my own mother 24 years ago. Then he was the young, energetic, and beaming with enthusiasm. He was gray now, and a bit paunchy, but still a dedicated administrator. His voice reached me as an indecipherable haze of instructions and admonitions and jokes and preparatory pep talk. For a moment the crowd parted just so, and I saw Jenny sitting in the front row, absorbing every word. Waves of dark hair tumbling between her shoulders. But then she was lost to me as the crowd began to stretch and disperse for tours of the building. I fought for one last glimpse, but I didn't stay. I'd seen enough. Plus, I had to see my mother. Thursday night was our night. We were on minimal speaking terms, but a ritual is a ritual. I'd knock. She'd sniff the air. If I smelled sober and the weather was nice, she'd step out onto the front walk. We mostly spoke through the screen door. But tonight, when I pulled to the curb, she was perched on the stoop, round body, tight as a fist. You need to eat, she said as I approached, but I don't want to sit out here. What can I say? It'd been over a year since I'd been invited into the sanctity of the screen porch. We sat on white wicker chairs. The table between us held a plate of sandwiches. I clutched one with both hands. I made myself eat slowly, and my mother told me that she'd been taking Jenny shopping for school clothes. She stood abruptly, nearly in mid-sentence, unlocked the front door, went inside, and engaged the deadbolt. While alone, I stuffed my mouth full of sandwich and put another in my sweatshirt pocket. A few moments later, a man came alone through the door. I'd seen his type before. Clean and shiny, shirt tucked, bit of a belly from too many donuts, but otherwise in good shape. So, I said, my mouth full, you're going to tell me to lay off the sauce. I don't care about your sauce, he said. He looked right at me, the way sober people will. I studied my sandwich. He said, how about we start the conversation with an introduction? His hand hovered in the space between us for a moment before I accepted it. He introduced himself as Paul Rivers, a recovered alcoholic. He said, your mother asked if I wouldn't mind speaking to her son about some trouble he's having. Let me stop you right there, Paul, I said, because you aren't the first reformee that my mother's had over. The sandwiches are a dead giveaway. You're wasting your time. It's the only thing I got enough of to waste, Paul said, and as long as I'm not drinking and still above ground, my time is a bonus and I don't mind sharing it. He kept his hand vertical between us, palm flat, fingers steady, like he wanted to physically cut the conversation in half. For starters, he continued, I can't offer you any advice. I don't care who you think I am. You never met me and don't know me, but I told your mother that I'd make the effort. You don't want to talk, that's fine by me. I got nothing invested in us, nothing at all. But I come from the land of plug and jug, and I know how tough it is to stop. I was trapped under the bottle for 25 years. I lost my wife and my daughters. I never got the wife back, but I got the daughters, and now I got 3 grandkids I see every day. You don't have to feel like this anymore. Like what? I said. He pursed his lips and said, like a drunk. I picked up another sandwich and stood. Who said I was a drunk? I said. Fair enough, he said, but let me give you my number, just in case. He handed me his card, and I thanked him for his time. I sensed my mother listening, ear pressed to the door. She was beyond crying. The downstairs lights burned hotly, everything glimmering in its place. Every knick-knack, every framed photo, even the one of me in my scout uniform, hair neat and feathered and parted in the middle, same as it ever was. On the way down the steps, I flicked Paul's card into the hydrangeas. It had been 3 days since I'd had a drink. Marilyn would have been perfectly happy to let me see Jenny. She told me herself in the Rite Aid where I'd gone to buy a bottle of cheap wine they had on sale. I spied her coming in the front door, and I ducked down the health and beauty aisle and stuffed my bottle into a bin of travel-sized shampoo. I stood near the pharmacy and pretended to study a display of weight gain supplements. When she found me, she said, There you are. You weren't trying to sneak away, were you? Of course not, I said. My collar was damp and sour with sweat. Marilyn cocked her head the way a dog might when confused or betrayed, a gesture that had haunted our marriage. She was dressed in loose clothes and had a post-yoga glow. Jenny has a cell phone, she said. I can give you the number. You can call in the evenings before she goes to bed. 6th grade hasn't started yet, and already she has a cell phone? Mostly for security, Marilyn said. I saw a kid in the parking lot holding a piece of bark and tapping it with his thumbs. Texting away, I said. It's all too much. I'm not texting anyone. Who said you had to text? Marilyn straightened herself and waited for an answer. I kept my hands in my pockets and rocked on my heels. After a moment, I picked up a jar of OptiPump protein supplement and studied the ingredients. Marilyn slumped her shoulders. You always surprise me, she said. I've never heard of a father so completely reluctant to even have his daughter's phone number. You truly are a piece of work. While she was talking, I worried that someone would find and purchase the bottle I'd cast adrift, a silly fear to have considering the size of the mountainous stockpile a few aisles over. But after Marilyn walked toward the greeting cards, I couldn't bring myself to rummage around in the bin and dislodge the miniature shampoo bottles and carry the wine all the way to checkout and stand in line behind a couple of moms pushing strollers. I can only picture how shitty I'd feel with Marilyn standing behind me, pretending she didn't see the bottle. Pretending that she didn't know why I was in the drugstore in the first place, and me pretending like I didn't see her, or that I was really interested in the cover story on People. I walked past the travel-sized racks. At the front counter, the pimply cashier swiped one item after another over the scanner. A small child stood at his mother's side and said over and over, in tune with the scanner's electronic chirping, I want a candy. I want a candy. Just begging and begging and begging. That's all for the day. More to come.